Old Swanner here. In this video on string bending and in the accompanying blog article, which I'll link up to the left and in the information box below, we'll take a look at the vital pointers which, if you miss any of them, could leave you with problems that stop you ever getting this technique as comfortable as you want it and need it to be. We don't really need a lot of notes to examine how to bend a string well on guitar. I'm going to focus in on really just two notes, fret 7 and 9 of the G string, which we can get the sound in our head with the music up to my left here. I can run that with the foot tap and the count. What we're aiming for is 1 and 1 and 1 and 1 and in a second we'll transform that with a string bend. I just pulled those two notes as representative of pretty standard scale, you'll all know. I'm picking these two notes, which are easier visualized possibly in what we're looking at today. I was going from 7 to 9 on the same string. Either way, instead of moving to a different place to play the note, we can stay in the same place, stretch this string until it sounds like fret 9 of the same string. Running it with the foot tap and count, looks and sounds like this. 1 and 1 and 1 and 1 and. And you can see there's a big pattern going on. Pick, foot and finger here are all moving together. They get basically down and then they come up together. Put it in the picture. Down, missed it. Down, up. Everything moves in sync. If you didn't fare so well on the example we just saw, then let's now take a look at some of the finer points of what I was doing to get that bend functioning nicely. Maybe the biggest pointer of all is when it comes to hand position. Most of us, I was no exception, our first bends we go straight for the classical position and try and push with the fingers. It's not to say you can't end up with good bends that way, and there are plenty of examples people say on YouTube where it does seem to work for them, but it's not generally the way that bending is recommended. What is recommended is the way that Clapton did it, Hendrix, well, Clapton still does it, Hendrix did it, Kossoff did it, and so on and so on. A much more diagonal position with the hand. The bend itself really looks like this. All the movement comes from the arm. If I get the camera on that, what I'm doing with my arm is this sort of a movement, as if I'm turning a key in a door. So my index finger sits against the neck. That's the pivot point. I'm probably going to have my thumb up. I can still pivot once I've found a position of comfort for the thumb. Let me drop the fingers on. Again, showing the arm. I'm really just trying to get this palm to move into the neck. So the diagonal position allows me the leeway to do that. In fact, I've still got a good inch and a half even after I've finished the bend. There's miles of room. So if you're crashing into the neck before you've finished your bend, address hand position. I'm using finger 2 to help strengthen the bend. It's pretty tough to get that with just one finger. B.B. King seemed to do alright with that sort of approach, but his fingers are a bit thicker than mine and probably most of yours. So generally we're going to help finger 3 along with finger 2 on the fret behind. The first finger I certainly don't recommend using to add strength. To me, coordinating the 3 fingers is a bit of a can of worms. It's way harder than coordinating the 2. And there are hidden benefits to having the first finger spare, not least that it can mute other strings nearby. It can mask the sound of any clanging that might come from a string that you catch after you've released the bend, with the first finger lightly sat on here. Here's the clang again about to come, but this time you might have heard the tiniest of clicks, but it disappears behind the sound of the bend. So the first finger is far more useful to come along for the ride and to be used to mute. If we end up raking through strings and things like that, I might be muting over here on the bottom couple, but the first finger can give me some insurance. So I can almost strum my bend. I'm literally just whacking all the strings. And with a bit of help from the first finger muting, lots of muting over here on the bass strings with the right hand. That's pretty common stuff, and it does make the playing easier and more enjoyable. And a final word on the angle that we're bending the strings at. If we're pushing with fingers like this, you can see that the pressure of the strings is going to push into the fingers. It tends to want to collapse those joints. Whereas when we're diagonal, that force that comes from the string as I bend is moving into this joint, and you see that doesn't really bend. That's not going to bend the same way a fingertip does. So this is much more rigid, and that's probably why that's the accepted way to bend strings. Twist of the hand, hold things steady here. There's not much chance of anything moving here if you focus on it. Maybe it's a bit generous to say, but that's almost all there is to string bending. Hand position, building up the strength so you can hold these fingers steady as we rotate the cradle of the arm, wrist and fingers themselves. There's just really one more hidden point for the exercise that hand will need to pick up on. Once I've bent, there's a tendency to hear that bend coming down before I play the fret 7 note again. Sometimes you want that. In this case we don't. We want to just hear the 7 and the 9. So the hidden trick I'm using to do that, and this all happens at quite a fast pace, is that I'm going to mask the sound of that bend returning to the neutral position with the pick. In slow motion, I'm going to touch that string, then I can release it back before I let it fire up again. So in a very slow motion, pick touches the string. I use that to guide the string back to the neutral position, and when I get to the neutral position, I can fire that note into action again. Now you can get this up to speed pretty fast, but it's important to understand that sequencing of events. After the bend, we touch the string with the pick, then we sort of almost guide it back to the neutral position, probably using the finger here, but the pick needs to follow and stay in contact with the string. As it gets to that neutral position, we go through the string. Now that's what I'm doing at a pretty fast pace, I guess. This is all going to happen in one. But notice you didn't hear that string going down. So the string itself is released in that split second that the pick is going through the string to pick it again. And that's a real power technique to get into your collection. There's various solos where you might want to repeat a bent note. That's a similar sort of a thing where I'm using the pick to mask the release of the bend before I repick that note. Again, in slow motion, that would look like this. Food for thought. Let's add a couple more notes to the single beat we've seen so far, and we can come up with a classic blues lick you can use anywhere. Again, there's a bit of string muting hidden in the background, which we'll now examine. Adding in an extra beat with a couple of top string notes to what we've just been examining gives us this pattern. I'll run it with the foot and the count. 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and, which pretty standard stuff, bit of a cliche really. Let's just look at the finer points of what I'm doing there. And just to look in on the details of how I'm getting all that to happen, beat 1 is basically the same as we did before, apart from I'm not going to lift the pick as the foot comes up. 1 and the pick will stay here ready to pick down on the B string. Now if I've used the first finger as I tend to, it's over here, but I'm going to need it there, ready for its next note. At this point, I pick the B string and use the side of the thumb to touch the G string, allowing me to let the G string back to the neutral position without hearing the bend coming down again. So again, 1, and here I come with the side of the thumb. That's my 2. And then the final piece of this jigsaw is to use what I call a layover, which allows me to change from this note to this note without having to have a gap between them. And for that I'm using a lot of the flexibility in this joint. In fact, that's most of the movement. Almost gets me there. But you can see I've got both notes now ringing. I don't want that. Sometimes you might, this time I don't. So as well as collapsing the joint, I'm just going to add a tiny bit of movement in the wrist to get this string so it stops ringing. As I lift that finger with the rotation here, I can get to that note at a perfect changeover. Now at the end of the sequence, if I want to loop it again without a gap, I need to have these fingers here ready to bend. So if your fingers have ended up over here, that's going to be tough to loop. But if you practice, pretty complex move, we're doing the layover, trying to get these notes to be clean, but I also need to get these fingers ready to start again. Let's just run all that in sequence. 1, and, so this finger comes across. Now I mute the G string with the side of the thumb, and then I finally execute the layover with regard to the next note I want to play, which will be the fret 7 note on the G string again. And these fingers now in position. 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 1 and 2. And that's quite a different end product to if we just say let everything ring. But I mean, sometimes you might want that. In this case we don't, and it's worth picking up on these finer points of how to get things real clean when you want them to be that way.